Welcome to the GreenPilled Network podcast. You are listening to season 5, this summer of Retro Rounds, which is hosted by Sejal and Lao Now Mao. This season will explore retroactive funding in Web3, and each episode features a different ecosystem unpacking their experience in implementing the retro funding mechanism. We'll explore how they're tailoring retroactive funding to their unique ecosystem, along with the challenges they've faced and ways of overcoming that. This season is co-hosted by Sejal and Lao Now Mao, and the next voices you'll hear on this episode are from them. Enjoy.
Welcome to the fourth episode of Summer of Retro Rounds. Today we will be diving into Celo ecosystem with Luuk and Monty. We will unpack the recent retro round that Celo did and also learn more about Celo. I think Celo is uniquely positioned in this space because of its strong alignment with the real world impact and focus on financial inclusion. So I would suggest if you are a dev or anybody who is curious to know how crypto can make a real difference, this episode is for you. So Lau is my co-host, and Lau, tell us what you are looking forward to in this episode.
Thank you. One of the things I'm really excited about is just listening and learning more about Celo's homecoming into Ethereum. They are now going to come back in the form of one of the OP chains. They are now becoming part of the super chain. And so it's also really interesting to see how this is the first case in which we see one of the Optimism superchain members conduct their own version of retro rounds. Whereas Optimism has already mentioned that they are interested in seeing more of those receiving funds either through RPGF or by being members of the super chain, like receiving benefits by being members of the super chain, to see them being the ones to allocate funds to those things that are most impactful to them, since they will have better information and know what are the things that need to be rewarded. So I'm really excited to see and understand better like how the Celo see itself becoming part of the super chain, and then leveraging some of the learnings that Optimism had through running their own retro rounds.
Welcome, everyone. We have Luke and Monty today with us, and Launamu, my co-host for this season. So, Luke and Monty, could you give us a TLDR on what is Celo ecosystem for the audience, who don't know what is Celo, and about your role and journeys within Celo?
For sure. Everyone super pleased to be here. There's so many angles to explain Celo, but let's start with the more kind of the simplest explanation. It's a blockchain. And more specifically, currently it's a layer 1 blockchain that's based on the EVM software or the EVM stack. It launched quite a long time ago on Earth Day in 2020 with a mission to make money better. And their perspective of the founders of Celo, which I'm not, but I'm very loyal to Celo, is to create a money that is inclusive and net positive for the world. If you look back at the very start of Bitcoin, Bitcoin was trying to do something comparable. We're saying, hey, our current money isn't sufficiently good to progress us as humanity to the next level. Now, Bitcoin as a money is built around certain features and certain values. A lot of it is about self custody, it's about ownership, it's about savings, kind of wealth preservation. And the Celo founders were looking at Bitcoin in the early days, were participating in the Ethereum ecosystem, and realized that those values might not be the values that work for everyone in the world or are able to progress the entire world. It might work for some subset of people that were early in or that have certain needs, yes. But for the majority of people, especially in emerging markets that are being plagued by inequality, by climate change, these solutions of wealth preservation aren't their primary needs. Privacy, even, for example, isn't primary thing on their mind. They need to eat. They need to make sure that their houses don't flood. There's other values and other features that are critical. So Celo launched on Earth Day as a mobile-first blockchain with the aim to facilitate simple stablecoins, low transaction fees, mobile first, and really bring the infrastructure to the people that needed it most. Now, when Celo did that, again, 4 years ago, the space was very different. There was no such thing as layer 2s. So Celo launched as a layer 1, an alternative blockchain to Ethereum. Interestingly, Celo has always been very close to Ethereum and has been contributing also to Ethereum. And the past year and a half, they have been on this journey to actually kind of move back or come home to Ethereum and operate as a layer two. They went through a nice journey where there were multiple partners who said, hey, our tech stack might be the right solution. And then ultimately, Celo, through a governance vote, completely on chain, token holders voted to become a part of the Optimism network, of the superchain, using the OP stack. And that's kind of where we are right now at Celo. We've 3-4 years of history of trying to build impact first, sustainable solutions. We're kind of finding or refinding our home within Ethereum, within the superchain. So we're actually at a quite interesting position as a blockchain right now. And then the ecosystem that has emerged around that is maybe as interesting. In the first wave of Celo, there was a very big move for UBIs. We had Good Dollar, we had Impact Market with hundreds of thousands of users claiming UBI on Celo. We also have Mento, a stablecoin protocol for the long tail on Celo. We recently, I think last week, they launched a Philippines stablecoin. There's a Kenyan shilling stablecoin. There's a Brazilian real stablecoin. And it kind of really shows again that Celo is hyper focused on these emerging markets, on these emerging countries. And then in 2021, 2022, because Celo has also a big connection to things like climate change, because they're so critical for humanity, Celo also started to become the home of ReFi or regenerative finance. And that is also still a path you're really seeing inside of the Celo ecosystem. This big push towards climate solutions, impact solutions, sustainable finance, green solutions. And I think one of the kind of best highlights of it is that Celo as a blockchain is extremely carbon negative, and we call it ultra green money, which means that for every dollar of, say, pollution that Celo the blockchain would emit, again, that's still assuming that it actually happens, but assuming that the blockchain has certain emissions, multiple times that is being purchased and sequestered on chain on Celo. So yeah, there's a lot of, again, theoretical, technical elements to Celo. There's an ecosystem around, and where we are now is really an exciting period in between this Celo Layer 1 to Celo 2, with the Celo 2 mainnet coming out ideally later this year, the end of the year. But then also as an ecosystem, right? Really improving on the verticals that we already have, from mobile-friendly apps, for example, MiniPay, that's being built with Opera in Africa. I think they just crossed 3 or 4 million users, but then also doubling down on other verticals. Like there's a new protocol called Cork being launched, a DeFi or finance first protocol. RWAs are growing. ReFi is refounding a new house. I mean, we just completed, I think 2-3 days before this episode, we completed the region coordination track and Gitcoin on Celo. So I'm super excited to be speaking about this today because I just feel that all those years of development, bear markets, and everything that came in between, we're now really at an exciting point to define what the next stage of Celo will look like.
Wow, love it. I think this was such a dope overview of Celo that I've got, and I'm so sure like audience will love this. And Luke, would love to know a little bit about more about your role and journey within Celo. Right, like when did you start, and at what point did you start?
Yeah, for sure. So if you look at my Twitter, my name is Luuk Douw, and I've been Luuk Douw now for a little over 4.5 years. I started my journey in Web3 as an event organizer in 2016 here in the Netherlands. After that, started a nonprofit in 2018 called the Caribbean Blockchain Network. We were looking for ways to create impact using blockchain. And it's here that we stumbled upon DAOstack, which was one of the early DAO frameworks. And we started contributing, me and some partners, into what they call Genesis Alpha, which was one of the first DAOs that existed. And ever since that moment, I have primarily worked, done, moved in DAOs. I really call myself a DAOist. I've really grown up in DAOs. I probably understand better how to talk to DAOs than to talk to normal companies, which is a superpower in some ways, but also a bit annoying in the real world sometimes. But long story short, I started off a small venture studio called Collectivo Labs. One of our biggest projects and kind of life mission for me is creating Collectivo Network, a network of local regenerative economies. And in that journey around 2021, we were looking for a place to call home. And that's where Celo came on my path. We spent the first year and a half primarily focused on just building Collectivo Network. Some successes, some learnings for sure. I think in many occasions we were too early with what we're trying to do. But then around 2022, 2023, I realized that, hey, I have a lot of experience running, designing, and kind of organizing DAOs. And I see that Celo as an ecosystem is moving more and more towards on-chain governance with an on-chain treasury. So ever since I've been playing a role in the Celo ecosystem as, I would say, one of the most active DAO operators. And that kind of accelerated even further, initially through Celo Europe, which was a regional DAO that I was part of. And then since end of last year, we started working on what we call Celo PG, or Celo Public Goods, which is the on-chain funding of public goods in the Celo ecosystem. We created a program around it. We also ran different treasury and governance updates in order to really set Celo Treasury up for being able to bring sustainability or even regeneration to the projects in the ecosystem that have an impact, and even to the individuals that have an impact. Because we saw that there were so many opportunities that were being unrealized because of that lack of kind of pathway from resource to potential. So yeah, for the past year, one of my primary roles, if not my primary role, has been leading Celo Public Goods and building on different programs to accelerate the builders that are making a difference in Celo, but also in the wider Web3 and even the world.
Yeah, Monty, we would also love to hear what's been your journey with Celo. Like, I remember it, for me, Celo was the first blockchain that I heard of. It was the first, but also blockchain that I looked into. What is it that they are building? I think it really resonated with me for some of the reasons that Luke mentioned, coming from a fintech background in which my total focus was how do we provide underbanked people with more financial services? I was looking at Latin American perspective and African perspective. How are we doing this with mobile money? How does that translate into blockchain? So would also love to hear what's been your journey with the Celo ecosystem.
Absolutely. So yeah, my journey's been a little bit different to Luke, but some rhythms and rhymes there as well. I come from, I think, quite an environmentalist background. I come from a family of sustainability professionals. But my mum's written a book called The Green Consumer Guide when she was my age, and it sold 1 million copies, and it has dedicated her life towards that mission. So I've always grown up around that discourse and that problem space. At the same time, I've always been a kind of techie builder, kind of energy. I studied philosophy and economics, and so crypto always had this interesting element of being this kind of radically disruptive new force, combining many of those kind of theoretical spaces. But of course, it never really had the environmentalism side to it. Quite the opposite when we think of Bitcoin and the early days of crypto. Until suddenly we had blockchains becoming super energy efficient with proof of stake, and suddenly the ReFi movement was born when Toucan Protocol and KlimaDAO managed to onboard like 10% of global carbon markets on chain, and suddenly everyone was like, hey, ReFi is a thing. There were some early pioneers before that, but really we saw this kind of huge wave coming of all these builders wanting to say, hey, we can do carbon on chain. Can we do all of these other regenerative, ecological, social impact projects utilizing blockchain? And I was studying my master's at Bristol at the time, doing kind of management with innovation master's course, and I just became totally hooked. I was like, this is where I want to be with my life. This is what I want to do. And so just ended up going super deep on ReFi. I ended up doing a kind of TED talk on the space, connected with John Ellison, who was doing the ReFi podcast at the time and the ReFi DAO blog. He just kind of left Toucan, and I had my own ReFi kind of startup that I was doing as part of my master's course, and really channeled that work into ReFi DAO, and kind of went full time with it, and have been through the journey of the ReFi space from then until now, which has been a very interesting journey to have gone on. I think part of just kind of zooming out on ReFi for a second, I think one of the things that always resonates with me is when I look at the world and I think, finance is almost one of the greatest coordination mechanisms that humanity has ever designed, seemingly guides our actions and decisions all over the world in a very decentralized manner every day, the invisible hand of market forces, etc. Right now, that's heading us towards total apocalypse and systemic collapse of ecology and society and everything, really. And how do we not do that? How do we redesign these tools so that we're not like baked into a system where these outcomes are happening, and stop tinkering around with paper straws and these kind of micro consumerist solutions and putting it all on the individual when there's a real deep systemic problem here. And I think blockchains provide us with a new tool, a new primitive to design these new systems. and previously would only be in the realm of huge governments or banks. We now have the ability to experiment with these tools, which is in itself a double-edged sword. We see low-hanging fruit of bad experiments or systems that are actually worse, or with maybe values that I don't align with. But actually, we can use these tools to do incredible things. And Celo's mission, of course, redesign money to be in harmony with the earth. Inspired a lot by Charles Eisenstein and money can be beautiful and all of this kind of thinking. And actually really trying to look at how do we use these technologies, not just to remain in magic internet land money, but actually have real impact in the real world, develop real solutions, and build a regenerative economy. And I think, Celo has the ecosystem, the kind of core commitment and resources to put towards this mission. And so I think I was actually feeling this the other night. I was like, damn, I'm so grateful that Celo just exists. Because it's like, you look at some of the other chains and yeah, there are some ReFi programs and etc. But it's a side quest for Celo. Like it's the core mission, it's the core focus, and the community that's built around it is really exciting and inspiring. It makes me think we can actually do this, whereas sometimes you have moments when you're like, what are we doing? It's all pie in the sky. But so, yeah, that's kind of been my journey. And yeah, obviously, so founding ReFi DAO, we've done a lot of work with creating this kind of local node architecture of communities across the globe that are from those communities assessing local needs and then saying, okay, how can we actually innovate and implement these ReFi tools and solutions on the ground? And so that's been a really exciting journey, seeing that local node network grow and start to thrive. And the synergies with Celo were quite clear. And we sort of started forming various proposals around what our collaboration with Celo could look like. We got caught up in the Celo community governance fund and some of the governance challenges and being first exposed to that kind of DAO mechanism. But really, that just ended up bringing me closer in. And, we went through some changes at ReFi DAO, ended up reforming a proposal to say, hey, how can we utilize some of the amazing innovation from Gitcoin, from Optimism, have funding for ReFi projects on Celo. And that really brought me closer with Luuk, who was obviously very active. And we said, rather than doing separate things, let's Celo Public Goods Initiative. And that's kind of how we came together at the beginning of the half of this year and started Celo Public Goods and all the things that we're doing today. So yeah, excited to chat a bit more about that, what we've done so far this year and what we'll be getting into later in this year and in 2025. So yeah, great to
Definitely. And I think as you mentioned, like there's some of these DAO systems can be so complex for people coming in. So I'm really excited and happy to see, as you mentioned, that ReFi found a home within Celo. I think it's also one of the really nice things about the Celo ecosystem, in which you have this very tangible communities that are doing this hands-on work at a local level, that are understanding first who's their user base, what are their needs, and thinking beyond, like focusing more on what the needs are. I think this goes on hand in hand really well with this idea of, can we redefine money? Like within the optimism ecosystem, there's it's not capitalism, it's not communism, like they're calling it optimism. We're trying to rethink how we maintain this digital public goods that have now emerged. We're well, they've always been around, but they are now, I think, more visible to some people than other within the Web3 ecosystem. So understanding as well, how does the perspective from the Celo community comes in with, how do we think about money as well? Like thinking of money as a coordination mechanism, as a way in which we can regenerate not only our financial system, but the way in which we collaborate. I think also, again, bringing back this very neat idea that these tangible communities that know each other, that have been doing a lot of work around local physical activities within their countries, within their regions, that are part of the Celo ecosystem, would be super interesting to hear. Well, RetroPGF, as initially posed by the Optimism ecosystem, is this community effort where the community is judging or evaluating what is impactful to the community. What is the take that Celo is having on running this program? Luuk, do you want to tell us more about what your thoughts are there?
Yeah, I have so many thoughts there. And I just love this topic. And a way to maybe shape this or kind of picture this for people that might not be kind of this deep in the trenches is, for me, I see a constant battle between two areas that are extremely critical. There's the underground work that needs to happen, the things that need to happen in the physical world to realize an impact that is important for the world. And on the other side, the tools that would theoretically or in practice enable those that can create that impact. And that's a very big extreme. At the same or comparably, you have an extreme between global and local. And I think a lot of the innovations around what you would call kind of coordination are primarily trying to speed up the resource allocation. And when I say resource, it's not just money, it's also information, context between those extremes. And with that context, what I really see as like let's put at one end the digital, I think it's like the internet. We're extremely dependent on the internet in everything we do here. And then Ethereum as this new internet, or Web3 as this kind of next generation of internet. Let's put Ethereum at that one extreme. And then at the other side, this person in a remote village that doesn't have enough financial capacity to start a business is being plagued by drought, that has very tangible needs. And where does value exchange happen for this to help solve this, and for the people in the middle to understand where they need to play a role in order to ultimately have that impact? And I think impact, I know especially you, Lau, probably have a lot of thoughts around impact, but ultimately it is just extremely hard because it's to a very large degree subjective. But then I also feel that with a lot of frameworks that we have, whether that's United Nations or EBF, or we are at least aligning on some kind of impact metrics that we say, hey, we all agree that at least this has some relevancy. And I think that this is another element, really. We're innovating on all of these fronts at the same time. That's also why it's so challenging and sometimes it looks messy, because it's not an easy solution. It's not linear in any way or shape. It's very much interconnected. But yeah, to really paint this picture, again, it's this long value chain of digital public good or infrastructure all the way down to real world impact. And I think that is where programs like Celo PG and specifically Retro PGF are trying to speed up those pathways. Right? So let's imagine I'm a builder and I can be very specific. Let's take Collectivo as an example. I come from a small Caribbean island. We used to have, I think, the highest pollution per capita for a very long time. We're close off the coast of Venezuela. We used to live of bad things: oil refinery, offshore, drugs. Those were like our top three economic drivers of the island. So I grew up in an island where money was dark. It was a thing that came from bad things. And it was just, I didn't have that much of a beautiful perspective of it at all. Money was ugly. So coming from an island like that, when I first discovered blockchain, I was doing business and philosophy. And I was like, hey, we can now reimagine our values. We can program these things. The whole world went open. And then I was trying to understand what the people on the ground needed. So we created a local stablecoin with MakerDAO in 2019. We called it Kiradai. It was like, wow, amazing. Until the day that my mom called me angry. Look, why do I need to pay $20? Blah, 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 blah. Because gas was too high. So this was a very clear kind of disconnect between the potential solution. It wasn't even a final solution yet, and just the infrastructure, the tools that we had to do that. Those are things that now you can't even imagine, but there were periods where people were paying $20 for a transfer of a stablecoin. And now RetroPGF is creating a pathway that incentivizes or promotes for people to bubble up these scars, these kind of real world triggers, like, hey, we want to do XYZ, but we don't want our moms to pay $20 gas fees, so we need this. And instead of waiting for being dependent on third party financing or government grants, which take way too long, like 2, 3, or whatever year cycles, they are now incentivized to just start making progress, building in public, sharing learnings, and then retroactively receiving a reward based on that process. Now, again, in all honesty, where we are right now, it's far not from perfect. Like, we're not there at all. But even if we're there a little bit, it already makes a big difference. And again, bringing it back to Collectivo, we are able and incentivized to, even the people that are no longer on the team because there's not enough money, to still do small things because they're like, hey, maybe it rewards us in some way and we can then build the next thing. And so it creates this idea that as long as you keep moving and as long as you keep developing and building open source or these open solutions, and you will be able to get rewarded and continue to build. And that maybe brings it back to a topic I've been increasingly kind of vocal about, is kind of bringing it back to Ethereum. Ethereum has this concept of the infinite garden or kind of infinite games, where the theory is that it's more important to pick the right game and just keep playing it with the right people. That is essentially how you would win in, I would almost say, in life, as a mantra, like play the infinite game. And from that perspective, Retro PGF allows more people to be able to keep playing the game forever. Because if it wasn't for Retro PGF, I personally probably wouldn't be able to do a third of the things I'm doing today. And those games would just potentially die off because other things come on my path. And so I think it's so important to have these programs like Retro PGF. Of course, there needs to be more around it. It's not just the retro element, but the retro element is a lifeline and a blood. It keeps it moving. It in some cases even helps it grow. But it at least gives you this rhythm, and I think that's very important. So I guess TLDR, it's a very important mechanism to ensure that good behavior is rewarded in perpetuity, and as a result of that, good behaviors are more rewarding, and more talent and more people will kind of flock to that.
Yeah, and I think this is particularly one of the very important pieces that the precisely ReFi ecosystem is looking as well into. How do we incentivize new behaviors that are in accordance to what's needed for us to continue to regenerate our ecosystem? Monty, what's the ReFi perspective from using this kind of programs?
One of the things I wanted to touch on there was this kind of, I think, tension that comes up when we talk about public goods funding, in that, like, what is a public good and what deserves funding, you know? And when we're talking about that in context of blockchain ecosystems, you know, there are many public goods out there, like air and clean water and clean environment, etc. In blockchain, when we're talking about RPGF, we're talking about a particular type of public goods and public goods funding. And you know, we've seen the current state of the markets, where layer 2 ecosystems are at, etc. Like, there's at the fundamental layer of a blockchain a need to be economically sustainable. Like, how do they allocate capital in a way that means that more people utilize the blockchain, more transactions, more sequence of fees, etc. So really, that's, I guess, at the root of the economic engine of blockchains and of capital allocation on blockchain and grants and retro PGF, etc. And so I think what's really interesting is then, well, where does the ReFi and the regen public goods come into that? You just like take any positive impact and just fund it, well, then the blockchain will die, and that will not then be a sustainable source of funding for that impact. You know, I think that's tied in with how optimism started with retroactive public goods funding and is now retroactive funding. It's a slight nod towards that, you know, optimism space as the super chain. You know, it needs to fund the tech infrastructure and et cetera that sustains all these other ecosystems. But that again is where I think Celo has this really interesting piece here of being a kind of home for regen, ReFi, real world applications, etc. Can actually, inhabit that space and actually look for that intersection of real world impact and public goods funding. So it's building the digital infrastructure, yes, but where does then that funding also create real world impacts, positive externalities, and how does the public goods funding support that, as well as regenerating Celo's system? But because we're joining the super chain, Celo doesn't have to focus as much on like the deep tech and, you know, the wider, it can leverage that from the wider ecosystem as opposed to having to build everything itself.
Yeah, I think this point that you touched on, Monty, is really important as part of the superchain vision and how the optimism ecosystem has been thinking, particularly about retro rounds and who should be the teams or the people determining who should be receiving funding. Like, I think the Optimism Collective is very aware that there's a lot of impact that is being generated that the badge holders, as the currently setup is, will not know how to evaluate that. So it's best also to push this evaluation and the depth choice of what's getting funded to the edges as well. And I see a really nice opportunity here for the Celo ecosystem. And they know the ReFi communities, not just the communities, but products, the technology that is needed to empower these builders within the ReFi ecosystems, and also for broader adoption with mobile payments in Africa, such as like the work that MiniPay has been doing. So I see a really good opportunity there for the Celo ecosystem to focus on how do we make this infinite game possible for these other niches within Web3 ecosystem that we are, or at least I definitely am, hoping to see more of.
Maybe I can jump in there because one of the things that have kind of taken my other side of my life is Back when Celo articulated first that they wanted to become an L2, they didn't have different options. They just said, hey, we're going to become an OP stack. And one of the things that me and some people around me did right away was, hey, if Celo becomes part of Optimism, we need to understand what's going on there. We need to understand, kind of learn their language and start to understand how we can collaborate. And we started this knowledge platform called Superchain Eco, which has now grown out to one of the main sources of kind of superchain coordination. We're actually organizing a big event in Bangkok in November. But it also allowed us to get an even better understanding of the mission and the diversity of that superchain. And I think we can bring it back again to this value chain, right? Like the biggest element or the biggest pusher being Ethereum. Ethereum cannot take all the different scaling approach. It cannot be on the ground everywhere. Cannot. They don't have to be the settlement layer. Thank you. And then after that comes a different kind of ecosystems of L2s bound by different values, different companies, different missions, and what so. And then within that, right, imagine you have Ethereum. That's already a decision by itself. People might opt in for Solana or not even blockchain, right? There's alternative people building comparable visions on non-blockchain solutions. But then imagine you pick Optimism, then within there, there's so much diversity. Again, there's of course common values, like we optimistic. I think that's such a strong value, and I think one of the reasons why Optimism is the most used L2 right now, it's because it's so actionable and so forward thinking and what so. But within that cluster, you really see that different geographies, different verticals are being explored now, and I think that's a really exciting phase where these different chains are really forming their identity, but they're no longer shaping an identity purely by themselves because they're also influenced by looking at, hey, what are the others doing? And I think that's especially what I really hope to explore even further in November at SuperCon is really physically also understanding, hey, where are the focus differences? Where are the cultural differences? There's clusters in Southeast Asia, there's clusters in Africa, but there's also different verticals. There's inclusive finance, there's RWAs, there's green tech, there's gaming, there's, and I think what we're going to see in the coming months, especially coming years, is hopefully a kind of positive sum outcome where people can agree to disagree and kind of divide the kind of the addressable market, which I think is again where this value chain can be optimized, where we're not trying to dominate on every market with every technology, with every XYZ and every model, but where we're like, hey, we have the best context, resources, network in Latin America and Africa, in let's say Philippines, and we have great technology and people building inclusive finance, on-chain coordination, green solutions. Great, let's hyper optimize on realizing that opportunity, while others might be dominating Africa on the gaming level. And instead of trying to compete for the same niches, actually creating positive sum collaborations between those niches. And I think it is quite challenging, right? It's a completely new economic paradigm that even, I mean, blockchain itself is quite collaborative. Often it's very open source, very built in public. But I think this is even a step further, and it touches upon, I think, deeper rooted fears and potential, right? Because we're still triggered in a way that, hey, my blockchain needs to sustain itself. It needs some relevancy. It needs some transactions. It needs some to be able to provide that ecosystem that Monty was explaining earlier, that you also need to think about everybody that's on the blockchain. Like, how do we sustain them? But yeah, I think that's one of the most exciting things for the coming years, really, is specifically for the Optimism ecosystem, but also for, I think, Ethereum and Web3 at large, kind of how do we optimize resource allocation, not just on the kind of individual project level, but also on the interdependency level? Where do we spend our energy? Because if we're able to do that well, then we can out coordinate Web2 and a traditional kind of economic paradigms, even with 1/10 of the resources, because we're just way more efficient at accomplishing and making an impact than these traditional systems.
I love that. It just makes me think, yes, these things are new as well, what we're doing, but also so much rhythm and rhymes with, when we look at like the super chain as a European Union or the United Nations. And, you mentioned then each of the super chain kind of carving out a specialization or a place within that. That's kind of like the division of labor in the global economy. And it's just like the parallels there, I think, are really interesting. And then like you say, it's okay. let's learn from what the conventional systems have been doing and all of the mistakes they've made, and then let's use this new technology to try and innovate it and be 10x more efficient or some crazy goal. And it's just really fascinating to see those experiments play out, and we're very much not there yet, which I think is both presents some problems, but obviously also presents the opportunities and the space to innovate, and so yeah, it's really exciting to be a part of that kind of new economy and new approaches.
Yes, and
I'm wearing my super chain top.
I saw.
I changed it whilst Luke was talking. I was like getting excited for Bangkok.
Yes, and I think this is particularly a really good and interesting point where like we need to be sharing more of what we are learning, what we're building. Like there's already so much open source technology that we all rely on regardless of which chain it is that we're building on. And I think this is also one of the reasons why having something as retroactive rounds is so important. But just as Luke mentioned, we need to coordinate better as well. Otherwise, it's just like we're all giving the same, like large amounts of money to the same groups without being mindful of, okay, what are other contributions, whether it is tech contributions, whether it is educational contributions, whether it is community like onboarding contributions that will enable more of the pie to continue to grow, right? At the end of the day, I think what several of us are focused on is how do we bring more people to play this game with us in the Web3 space? How are we able to rethink how we coordinate? How do we give more power to people so that they can make more decisions? And all of this is based on experiments, just as Monty mentioned. It's like we are experimenting. Sometimes we mess up, sometimes we get it right. And the most important thing, I think, there is how can we share when we're messing up and what we're getting right so that we don't have to be repeating the mistakes that others have already made. So here, what are some ideas of both things that you would like others to be sharing with the Celo PG team around? I know there's more rounds to come. How do we make better rounds for the Celo ecosystem? And also, what are some of the things that the Celo team would like to share with others around these learnings?
I mean, that's such a great approach to this, Lau. And I think for me, the answer to this is collaboration and joint ventures. One of the DAOs I helped incubate was Prime DAO. We were going deep into DAO to DAO coordination back in 2021, 2022, looking into ways how to do incentive alignment at the very root, at the start of something. And for me, if we take a perfect example, I think it's the recent region coordination round that happened. We had ReFi DAO, Greenpill, Celo PG, not just sharing some kind of high level learnings, but getting in the weeds together and forcing not just, again, shared ideas or learnings that are relevant for one specific group, and then you need to see if the context works for you, blah, blah. We literally came with all our backstory and said, what do we want now? And from that, we were forced to come to concessions about, oh, what is important? What is this? What do these people need? Do they need it in there as well? And I think something like that, really forcing those multiple groups to shape a program together, fund it together, run it together, I think that really drives a level of coordination that's so much deeper than just sharing a list of learnings on an article, because it's so hard to pass that knowledge on and to understand what knowledge is relevant. And but if there's a milestone, like if there's a North Star and it directly affects the outcome of my community and myself, I'm going to pay so much more attention to the resource and the learnings there. And if you kind of draw that back to the super chain, I think one of the things that Celo PG are trying to do is to apply for a super chain grant, which is a program that allows OP chains to run a grant program for their own ecosystem. And one of the things we're trying to optimize for in that is programs and projects that bring clusters of stakeholders together. So, for example, imagine a regional DAO with two protocols and the United Nations together want to build this program in this country with the government. Those are the things that I'm most excited about. How can we create these multi stakeholder collaborations that lead to resource knowledge and kind of impact alignment on those levels? So yeah, I think really those kind of joint ventures and collaborations, multi-stakeholder are the way to make progress there.
I love that. I'd love to just build on that for a sec as well. And I think two answers that are kind of screaming to me at this moment is one, like not reinventing the wheel a lot of times. I think, we look at the DAO space and the blockchain space, there's a tendency to go, everything we're doing is new and it's also innovative, and like ignore the decades of organizational economic theory, research, practice in the conventional space, because we're saying, hey, it's all new because it's on blockchain. And I think that almost hubris has led to a lot of the fuck ups that we've seen in the space. And I think there's so much to learn from that, and then build on it with all of these new primitives and new ways of doing things. And so I think, yeah, certainly as well in the ReFi space, let's not ignore the big history in regenerative economics and sustainable development and some of the amazing things that are going on in that space, just because we live in the ReFi bubble and etc. And one of the things I think that then has been building on that as well, and also building on Luke's point around shared initiatives. I'm obviously one of the founders of ReFi DAO, GreenPill Network. We've got Sajal here, who I think is one of the founders of GreenPill Network. We're doing similar things. We're very values aligned, and I've always loved that, and the same with Celo. And so with this regen coordination movement, bringing those networks together and saying, instead of just like competing and building our own islands and facing the same problems, and where can we share some of those solutions, and how does that bind us together in a shared incentive structure, etc. And so I think that's been really interesting to see how that's been kind of bubbling for a little bit, and now with the shared Gitcoin round provided that kind of real impetus to pool resources together, and is really starting to build those common foundations. And now when I'm looking at the problem of, say, impact tracking and measurement, which is a big kind of area that we need to figure out in ReFi DAO, and when you're creating a decentralized network of local communities across the globe and allocating resources towards those, when you're small, okay, you can just kind of sense what's going on. When you scale, you need to really have a robust system for impact tracking and measurement. And instead of doing that in the island of ReFi DAO, the same problems are going to be faced in GreenPill Network. The same problems are looking at Celo regional DAOs and in the wider space. And so if we solve that problem together, we then all mutually benefit. And if we're tied in with the right incentive structures, etc., we're all going to the same place, and we have the shared values. And so I think that's been really exciting to see, and we can kind of pool some of the learnings and the resources and the solutions in that space. So definitely more coming soon here. I've been going deep on something called the common approach, the common foundations, and so we'll be sharing more about that soon. But yeah, just really excited to see those experiments blossoming and the kind of collaborative spirit emerging.
Yeah, I love that. I think in every episode, I say that this episode could be a series of episodes. Like there is so much that we can unpack together. But one of the things that Lau and I have been talking about is how do we talk about sharing the learnings, and we want to talk about our fuck ups, and even we do an event now which is fuck up nights, right, just to make sure everyone comes together and share their learnings and the things that went wrong. But I think now I think that Luke and Monty, you guys are the perfect partners to actually launch this. We should totally come together on this and do something about it, right? So that it's actually happening, right? So I know we are approaching towards the end of the episode. I would love to know your thoughts on retroactive funding mechanism in general. Like how do you see this evolving? Like what are the maybe trends or innovations that you would like to see with this in the public goods space, now that Celo also did their first retro round? There have been previous funding experiments and planning more rounds. So yeah, what would you like to see, or something that you're really excited about?
I'm quite opinionated on that front. And I think, again, I just have this logic in my brain: Ethereum, Optimism, Celo, Reworld. And logic comes coming back to me. And one of the things that I think is extremely critical from the optimism perspective is being more clear about the North Star, and being clear about that North Star ahead of time. I think one of the biggest frictions that the latest retro rounds have been, some of the elements have been fixed kind of by articulating earlier what the topics would be, but then I think in many cases it's still unpredictable what the metrics would be. And I think that is one of the common themes, right? Once you have a North Star, you don't need the exact measurements, but at least an indication of what you should be optimizing for, then you can then find a balance between what you ideally or personally feel you should be doing and what has been articulated by whatever entity or organization or ecosystem that is funding you to look for the optimal path. And I think we're now still in a stage where that optimal path has too many gambles in there, where you need to decide yourself, oh, I think governance means on-chain votes, let me optimize for this. Where maybe you thought that optimizing for education reads is the better thing, but you're just afraid that that won't get funded, so you don't do it. But so I feel that that is such an important and critical fact on the optimism front. Now, if we take that to Celo, I think we are, or hopefully going to be able to, after the end of October, we're going to do a retro citizen round. So then we had 2 retro rounds on Celo RPGF 0, which focused on projects, primarily backward looking, kind of past 18 months. Then Celo Citizen, again, backward looking past 18 months. We're going to move to Celo 2. And I think then as an ecosystem, we need to come together, set a couple of North Stars, and really be like, 5 years from now, where do we want to be? Here, 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 or at least somewhere in that direction. Great. Let's work back and identify some common themes that, as if you're building around that, we will ensure or look for ways to kind of keep you involved. But I think that that is something that in a Celo case, we can only do once we have done this kind of next pulse check on the ecosystem. We have an understanding of the projects now. Soon we'll have an understanding of the individuals. We're going to have a new tech stack, like new, almost like clean sheet. And I think that's really going to allow us to, again, look forward 3 or 5 years into the future. And maybe as a final thing from my side, maybe coming back to something Monty said, where he said, we're still a far away. I disagree. I think we're super freaking close to a big breakthrough when it comes to on-chain coordination. If I compare the resources, knowledge, topics, conversations, quality, access, everything, pay from now between from today, even in a semi-bear market, not great conditions, L2s are a little bit down. If I compare this to 3 years ago, 4 years ago, but then even more 5 or 6 years ago, there was nothing. No multi-sigs, no L2s, there high gas. There was, I think we're so far along. If it wasn't for regulatory uncertainty, I almost want to say bullcrap, because a lot of it doesn't seem, in my opinion, to accomplish what it's trying to do. I think once those hurdles are gone, I think on the technical front, next year we're going to have interoperability for sure. Next year, we're going to have account abstraction for sure. Next year, if regulatory hurdles clear up a bit, we're going to have instant on and off ramps. We don't need much more blockchain innovation, from my understanding, from my perspective, to build a lot of the systems that we're imagining. So I really think that if we, I would say, almost get lucky, but if we push and resolve some of these hurdles, that within 2 or 3 years from now, we can really be at the stage where it's not 10% of carbon credits or impact running on chain, but we could be looking at 30, 40, 50%. And yeah, I think so. I really feel that that's the case. Even if you look at the terminology, it's changing again. It's changing quick. We went from things like blockchain to cryptocurrencies to then Web3 became a thing. And now we're talking about things like on chain summer, on chain finance, real world this. I really feel that we are getting so much closer, and now really is the time to be tough, because it is not easy, and that's maybe why it feels like we're far away. Like we're definitely not there in a comfortable way, but I think in an uncomfortable way we're very close actually to these big breakthroughs and having a big impact.
Yeah, I think this is also where we start to see the Web3 ecosystem as a whole mature as an industry. I remember when I started in the Web3 space, it was like, oh, of course no one is looking for product market fit. It doesn't really matter. Like we're not, the industry is not at that stage yet. But I think that we're getting closer and closer. And similar to what Luuk was mentioning is we already have a lot of the infrastructure that is needed for us to start testing out, is this something that people actually want? Not just in our little bubbles of highly technical people, but is this something that can generate good for a larger base of people in different geographical locations? Can we get to adoption of projects that are solving for people's needs? And see how we continue to evolve. I do agree, though, as with what Monty was sharing, in terms of the coordination games that we're playing, there's still a lot of way for us to, like a lot of path for us to cross. I think in terms of technology, Of course, our technology will continue to evolve, and there are several things, bug fixes and improvements that we can continue to build on. But I agree that the technology is ripe for people to start building more projects that are serving larger audiences than these little bubbles. And before we wrap up, this has been an incredibly interesting conversation, hearing and learning more about the Celo ecosystem, the ReFi ecosystem, how these communities make up, and inform as well this community-led efforts to improve how capital allocation is being done in the Web3 space. We heard a little bit of alpha from Luuk, so there's going to be an upcoming retro round for citizens. Is there any additional alpha that you would like to share with our listeners about either upcoming developments in your grants programs and the evolution of Celo PG, and what else should we be looking forward in terms of Celo becoming or already being one of the members of the superchain?
I'm happy to take this one, Monty, but a lot of credit for this goes to you. So within the realm of the superchain, one of the projects that we've been doing at Superchain Eco is building something called a superchain account, as a way to do two things. One, move more people to a better wallet from a externally owned account to a smart account built on Safe. But then second, also getting a better sense of context and contribution within the superchain through kind of one source of truth. There's a lot of different systems, right? There's the region token, there's the region score, there's the layer 3 galaxy. There's different mechanisms that measure some value or relevancy within whatever context. But we realized that there's no such thing for the superchain. But then while doing it, we also realized that there's no such thing for Celo. And these scores can be so important as a mechanism to speed up decision making, speed up resource allocation, because if you're be able to contextualize someone or a project, or you're just able to deal with it way better. So we're at the point very soon to launch superchain accounts, but on the backdrop of that, we're already making progress on a concept we call prosperity passport that will be developed on Celo. It's a bit of an ultra alpha because there's still some risk that it doesn't happen in the way that we hope it happens. But I think that's also the nice thing about this space. Like, I'm very happy to say today that we're going to do everything we can to try to have Prosperity Passport live by the next citizen round on Celo, as a way, even if it's in the simplest version, just as a way to get some information about what you've done on Celo, what you've maybe done outside of Celo, what you've done in the ReFi space, what you've meant for Celo PG, and then understand how that influences the program design and decision making from the people that are involved in those decisions. So yeah, I think that's something that I'm super excited about. It's something that Monty and I have spent 2 or 3 months just jamming, and literally like jamming. Like, we went from idea A to C to F to, and I think this week actually we had quite a breakthrough where we're like, hey, we don't need to build anything because we have a tangible thing coming up, a citizen round. Let's build something that works a little bit for that, and then we move from there. So I think that's a big alpha, and I'll let Monty add to that.
Yeah, 100%. I just want to build on that as well. And I think looking at Optimism's RPGF and the wonderful work of, say, Open Source Observer and other kind of ways of really looking at what those metrics are that are important to evaluate these things. And when we're looking at on-chain builders and on-chain applications, yeah, there's a lot that can be done by looking at those metrics of open source and etc. But when we move to other realms, whether it's citizens or communities or ReFi, what are those other metrics and how do we get that at scale? When we're looking at citizens, like Celo citizens, people who have been in the Celo community, like there's a bunch of on-chain data that we can get for that. How do we get there? Well, we can aggregate, all these different badges and data points and etc. And so I think, what Luuk has been building with Superchain accounts and bringing that into a kind of prosperity passport and creating almost like a generalized infrastructure for identity building on chain, I think is a really interesting application. And we have a chance here with the Celo Citizens round to then trial that out with a reasonable 250,000 Celo tokens to distribute to all of those citizens. And so I'm really looking forward to seeing how that experiment goes and then where we build from there. And we've already just done GG21, and right now I'm like crunching the numbers on the matching calculations with regen tips, proof of regen, and seeing how those signals influence the quadratic funding allocations. And the more signals we can play with, the more we can start to optimize and tweak these systems so that we can get the results and the optimal capital allocation systems that we're looking to build. So yeah, just really excited to build on the shoulders of giants, but bring the kind of unique flavor of Celo and regen, and see what experiments we can do to really make this vision a reality. So really grateful as well. I mean, look at us. We got four Celo public good stewards in the call right now. I was super happy to be able to, I want to say poach, but not poach. I mean, bring both of you, Sajal and Lau, into the Celo public goods team, and just really been enjoying building with you and the other stewards, and just really excited about what we're doing together.
Yeah. No, and I think this is really great alpha. I definitely it's part of the work that I do, looking at how do we improve those reputational systems, and more than anything, how do we create additional impact data so that we're making sure that all of the different items that enable the Web3 ecosystem to thrive, from open source software contributions to what communities, what educational initiatives, onboarding initiatives are contributing to enable us to get to more people. How do we evaluate them? How do we generate the data that is going to allow us to make this capital allocation so much more efficient? So this is the end of the podcast, but I'm definitely looking forward to chatting with both of you on what the Prosperity Passport is going to look like. Yeah, no, this sounds super exciting and super interesting. Definitely want to hear more about it. So maybe we'll just have to do another episode, Sejal. But I'll give it back to you so you can tell us more about.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you so much, Luke and Monty, for sharing that. I do want to say, it has been great working with you guys, and I love the fact that you have so much appetite for experimentation. That is exactly what we need in the space, and I think Celo ecosystem is quite lucky to have folks like you, and and grateful that we are also here because it's super aligned, and looking forward to collaborating more. And yes, thank you so much, and I'm going to end this now. So it's a wrap up for the Cello episode. I am quite amazed to see the fact, the initiatives Cello has been taking, region coordination round that just got concluded in GG, and the upcoming Citizens Retro round, right? So find all the details in Cello's forum about what this round is all about. If you're eligible or not, we will put it in the show notes. Now I've been seen like round operators. It's quite interesting to see how they are experimenting with these different rounds and mechanisms to achieve the outcomes or objectives for their ecosystem. As an expert, like, what are your thoughts on this? And tell us a little bit more about the strategy by round operators.
So particularly interesting is how Celo decided to use these retroactive rounds, like the one that has already passed, in which they focused on projects that have been around the Celo ecosystem for a long time and rewarding that loyalty and that perseverance of continuing building. I think it's a really good incentive as well to show them we value that you've been part of the Celo story for a really long time, and we really look forward to having you as part of this new chapter in which Celo becomes part of one of the OP chains. And then for the upcoming round that Luke mentioned at the end is they'll be running this retro round for Celo citizens. So people that have helped shaped Celo governance, and now again, as it's transitioning into becoming a member of the superchain and revamping its own governance after so many years, this is a wink to these people. We really appreciate the work that you've been doing, and we're looking forward to have you participate more. So their strategy on leveraging this mechanism, not only to distribute funding in accordance to what has been useful and has been valuable to the Celo ecosystem, but also to understand who the members and key contributors and participants of the ecosystem are, is quite interesting. A little bit of a different flavor to what some of the other round operators that tend to focus more on, like, bring more developers, bring more X, bring more Y and Z. These are rounds that are enabling Celo to understand better who's part of their ecosystem, and through that same process incentivize them to remain in the ecosystem and continue contributing. So I'm really excited to see as well how this Citizens Round plays out at the end of this year. And if you're interested in bringing value to the Celo ecosystem, particularly in its governance, understand more about how they are moving and how they are shaping who's going to be a citizen, what that looks like, make sure to come over to the Celo forum, check it out, read through the proposals, and start engaging them.